Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show that acts as your shortcut to being genuinely well-informed. We take the densest sources, the research, the industry reports, and we pull out the critical knowledge you actually need.
And for this deep dive, we are tackling one of the most stubborn challenges in, well, global climate action, defossilization.
Right.
Our mission here is to really examine the potential and the practical hurdles of a very specific energy solution for cleaning up heavy industry, the so-called hard-to-abate sectors.
And the source we're digging into today is a fantastic deep dive in itself. The full title is, and bear with me here, Electricity-Based Methanol-to-X as Integral Solution in Hard-to-Abate Segments in the Energy Industry System on the Case of Industry Expectations.
It is a mouthful,
Yeah.
but the core idea is absolutely crucial.
So what's the big picture?
The big picture is that hitting our climate goals means we have to completely transform things like chemical production, maritime shipping, and aviation. And while electricity and hydrogen get all the attention, this study argues that e-methanol is really emerging as the third most important energy carrier.
And that little E at the beginning is key, right? E for electricity.
Exactly. E-methanol is a core pillar for phasing out fossil fuels. And this term, Methanol-to-X, or MTO, just summarizes how versatile it is. It's not just a fuel. You can turn it into jet fuel, methanol to kerosene, or even into basic plastics.
What's so interesting here, and it's really the hook for this whole study, is the central tension they found in Finland.
Right. You have this situation where companies see a clear, massive competitive advantage in making e-methanol domestically.
But they're not doing it.
They're not. They're in this passive state, just frozen, waiting for clearer, stronger regulatory signals before they'll actually commit the money and seize the opportunity.
Okay, let's unpack that paralysis. Because when we talk about decarbonizing these huge industries, the conversation usually starts with direct electrification or maybe green hydrogen. So why does this study lean so hard into methanol?
It's because while you can use renewable electricity directly, a lot of these hard-to-abate sectors, they just need a derivative, something liquid or gaseous that's easier to handle.
And hydrogen is the first thought, but it's got problems.
Big problems. Chemically, it's vital. But physically, it's a bit of a nightmare for large-scale logistics.
It's the physical properties, isn't it?
Exactly. You're dealing with extremely low density, a super low boiling point, a wide flammability range, and, this is a big one, it can cause hydrogen embrittlement in pipes and tanks.
So it actually damages the infrastructure.
It can, yeah. It's just hard to move, hard to store, and it's tough on the hardware.
So if not hydrogen, what's next? The study mentions e-methane and e-ammonia.
It does. E-methane works with the existing gas grid, which is great, but there's a huge risk of leakage. And methane is a potent greenhouse gas, so that's almost a non-starter.
And e-ammonia.
E-ammonia is promising, but the study projects it's going to be economically viable first in places with tons of sun. Think the Mediterranean, North Africa. That makes it tough for Northern Europe to compete on price.
Which brings us back, by process of elimination, to e-methanol.
And that's why the study focuses on it. It's a key part of this whole Power-to-X economy, turning renewable power into stable liquids. And it has this incredible potential across chemicals, shipping, and aviation.
And it's not some new niche product. It's already a huge commodity.
A massive one. Global demand is around 110 million tons a year. Europe is about 10% of that. And if you look at where it goes today, about 32% is for methanol to olefins, or MTO.
And that MTO process is a big deal globally, right?
Yeah.
Especially in China.
It's the single biggest application. China has over 20 plants running this process, mostly using methanol made from coal, which is, not great for the climate.
This is where it gets really concrete for you listening. Those products from MTO, ethylene, and propylene, they are the absolute basic building blocks of the entire petrochemical industry. They get turned into polyethylene, polypropylene, PET, PVC.
I mean, think about that. It's the plastic in your packaging, the fibers in your clothes, the insulation in your house, the dashboard in your car. Getting a green, defossilized source for these chemicals through e-methanol is how the energy transition actually shows up in your daily life.
Okay, so if e-methanol is the answer, what's the perfect recipe for making it? The study takes us straight to its case study, Finland. You need two main things: cheap, renewable electricity and a sustainable source of CO2.
And Finland, it turns out, is sitting on a gold mine for both. On the electricity front, in the second half of 2024, Finland had the lowest electricity price for industrial consumers in the entire EU.
That's a gigantic competitive edge.
A gigantic one. Plus, it's a stable, low-risk place to build major infrastructure. But the real game changer that the study points to is the CO2 source.
Right, the biogenic CO2.
Absolutely. Finland has these abundant, concentrated sources of biogenic CO2. In 2022, industrial emissions were 42 million tons, and almost 60% of that 24 million tons was biogenic. From trees, basically.
And most of that comes from one place, the pulp and paper industry.
Right, 18.8 million tons. And the study ran a really striking calculation on this.
What did they find?
They found that if you took that CO2 from the pulp and paper mills, you could convert it to e-methanol, and then turn that into 1.3 million tons of e-kerosene for airplanes.
Hold on, 1.3 million tons. Is that a lot? How does that compare?
It's massive. That single number is roughly twice the total sales of aviation fuel in Finland in 2022. Just from one industrial waste stream, Finland could become a sustainable aviation fuel powerhouse.
And the technology is pretty much ready to go.
Methanol production itself is very mature. The downstream steps, like MTO, still have room to get cheaper. But historically, these kinds of chemical processes have a really fast learning rate. Costs drop about 20% every time you double capacity.
So this tech is poised to get cheap fast.
Exactly. It could easily overtake older, less efficient methods like Fischer-Tropsch synthesis, which isn't expected to improve nearly as quickly.
So this brings us to the core dilemma of the study. Finland has cheap power, tons of sustainable CO2, technology that's ready to scale, and it's a stable place to invest. So why aren't companies building these plants?
And that's where the interviews come in. The researchers did a qualitative case study talking to 5 key companies, energy, petrochemicals, advisory firms, to find out what was going on.
And they found this great reluctance.
A great reluctance. And it's not unique to Finland. They've seen similar things in Sweden and Norway. It's more nuanced than just companies being lazy or greedy.
So what's really driving it?
It's a classic risk management problem. These companies are very hesitant to invest in new tech that could disrupt their existing, very profitable operations. And there are real safety and operational concerns with any new large-scale chemical process. Why risk certain profit today for an uncertain green future?
The study breaks down these challenges into 5 themes. The big one seems to be regulation.
It's the biggest one by far. The consensus from the interviews was that current EU regulation is just not effective at creating demand, especially for green chemicals. All the focus is on transport, on aviation. The chemical industry is kind of left hanging without clear, binding targets.
This study even quantified that feeling of uncertainty.
They did. Words like ambiguity or uncertainty came up over and over again more than 24 times. It was the #1 complaint.
So there's this paralysis.
Okay.
But ironically, who do they think can solve it?
Regulation. They see government and EU regulation as the only thing powerful enough to actually create the demand they need to see before they'll invest.
Which leads right into the market theme and this green premium problem.
The central issue is that customers, the off-takers, aren't willing to sign long-term contracts for more expensive e-methanol. And without those contracts, the producers can't get the financing to build the plants.
So everyone agrees it's the future feedstock, but nobody wants to be the first to pay more for it.
That is the green premium price gap in a nutshell. And that high risk is why the theme of collaboration was so important. The companies all said they can't do this alone. They need to share the risk, share the expertise, and build out this new value chain together.
And then there's the technology itself.
Yeah, while they're optimistic, they did point to the complexity of the MTO process and some challenges with still developing technology. So the technical hurdles are real, but the biggest blocker, again and again, is the lack of regulatory clarity.
Okay, so what regulations are in place and why aren't they enough, especially for the chemical sector?
For chemicals, the main driver is the EU emissions trading system, the ETS, the cap-and-trade system. Free allowances are being phased out, which will eventually force companies to pay for their CO2 emissions.
That's the stick. But the study points out a problem with the new carbon border tax, the CBAM.
Right. The stick isn't sharp enough yet. CBAM currently only covers a few basic products like hydrogen and fertilizers. It doesn't include the huge variety of more complex chemical products that would come from MTO.
But the transport sector is a totally different story.
Totally different. It's driven by aggressive, mandated quotas. especially for aviation and maritime, since we expect road transport to mostly electrify.
Like with Fuel EU Maritime.
Exactly. That regulation sets a huge emissions reduction target up to 80% by 2050, and it has a specific sub-target for these renewable fuels of non-biological origin, RFNBOs. That's the signal the industry needs.
And aviation is similar with Refuel EU Aviation.
Yes, it mandates a growing share of sustainable aviation fuel, SF, up to 70% by 2050. And critically, it has a dedicated sub-target just for e-kerosene. That's a guaranteed market. That's what's missing for chemicals.
Now, when you compare e-fuels to biofuels, it's not even close, is it?
No. A study points out e-kerosene is about 19 times more area efficient than biofuels. So to hit those huge aviation targets without covering the continent in energy crops, you absolutely need e-methanol derivatives.
Okay, connecting all this back.
Yeah.
We have to talk about the projected scale of this future demand. The numbers in this study are, frankly, mind-boggling.
They should genuinely shock you. Let's look at the theoretical European demand for e-methanol.
I'm ready. Give us the projections.
By 2030, the total demand is projected to hit 50 million tons.
50 million.
By 2040, that jumps to 186 million tons. And by 2050, the estimate is 424 million tons.
Okay, let's just process that first number. 50 million tons by 2030. The study says most of that, 47 million, is for the chemical industry.
Right.
That is nearly 5 times the EU's entire current demand for fossil methanol. So this transition in the chemical sector is coming, whether the companies are ready or not.
Precisely. But scaling up production isn't the only challenge. You have to get the raw materials, specifically that sustainable CO2.
The bottleneck.
To make that 50 million tons of e-methanol in 2030, you need 86 million tons of CO2.
And where does that leave us?
While the projected CO2 demand for just 1 year later, 2031, is 90 million tons. That already exceeds the total available biogenic CO2, around 80 million tons, from the EU's entire pulp and paper industry.
Wow. So we hit the supply wall almost immediately. And by 2050, the demand is 726 million tons of CO2.
Which means, unless other sources like capturing CO2 from waste incineration or cement plants or even direct air capture are scaled up incredibly fast, there just won't be enough sustainable carbon to go around.
And then there's the electricity.
Oh, yeah. The electricity challenge. To meet that 2050 demand of 424 million tons of e-methanol, you'd need 5037 terawatt hours of renewable electricity.
5,037. Just so you can get your head around that number, that would require nearly doubling the EU's entire 2023 electricity consumption. That's an entire industrial revolution in 25 years.
And that brings us full circle back to the strategic importance of places like Finland. Finland has a theoretical onshore wind potential of 1,650 terawatt hours. That's nearly 20 times its current use.
So if they built it out, they wouldn't just be self-sufficient.
They'd be an energy lifeline, with vast export potential for the entire European market.
So what's the big takeaway here? This deep dive into electricity-based methanol-to-X as an integral solution in hard-to-abate segments in the energy industry system on the case of industry expectations. It shows that Finland has these incredible assets, cheap renewables, tons of CO2, but it's stuck. It's stuck because of industry passivity, which is rooted in regulatory uncertainty and that price gap.
The study's conclusion is unambiguous. Regulation is the key. The chemical industry needs clear, binding sub-targets for using these green fuels, just like the transport sector has. And they need policies to help bridge that green premium until the new tech can compete on its own.
And here's a final provocative thought for you to chew on. This analysis really highlights a huge strategic risk. If domestic EU supply from places like Finland gets delayed by this paralysis, other countries like China, which already has a huge MTO industry and is building renewables like crazy, could become the dominant low-cost suppliers for Europe's e-methanol demand.
Which raises the question, does the EU need a more aggressive mechanism, maybe an output-based pricing system that actively penalizes fossil-based products to force its own transition and make sure it secures those incredibly valuable domestic assets before it's too late?